Hi, we're OfferPad, and we want to buy your home. Just go to OfferPad.com, enter basic information, and we'll send you a competitive offer. It's that easy. We'll even move you locally for free. We've helped. Hi, we're OfferPad, and we want to buy your home. Just go to OfferPad.com, enter basic information, and we'll send you a competitive offer. It's that easy. We'll even move you locally for free. We've helped.
Good evening, folks. How is everyone doing today? So before we get going, I just want to do some check, make sure that you guys can hear me nice and clear, but also that you guys can hear the piano. Let's see, piano. You guys can hear the piano nice and clearly. Just give me a thumbs up if the piano is coming in nice and clean on your end. And if you can hear my voice also nice and clean. I want to make sure we have a nice stream today. Miss Robinson, how you doing? And what's up, Jordan? See y'all. Audio and everything sounds good, all right. Ed gives me a thumbs up, so audio is good on his end. That's good, love it. So how's everybody doing today? I mean, y'all having a wonderful Wednesday so far? You know, I trust everybody's doing well, you know. I've been doing this YouTube thing since, started in 2014, but really sort of took it serious in 2016. And I know a lot of you guys been with me since, and you know, it's just, I feel like I know all of you, even though most of you, in fact, the majority, and by majority I mean the overwhelming majority, 99.9% of you guys I've never met in person, and not even on a Zoom session. So, you know, I communicate with a lot of you through YouTube and Facebook and emails and stuff, and so I feel like I know you guys to an extent, you know, but in reality, I don't really know what goes on in your day-to-day lives. And so I'm often curious and just really hope everybody's doing well and life's good, you know. We know that things can always be better, but at least it's manageable and it's enjoyable. What's up, Ian from a yard? Ian. So today, while the others jump on here, let's see how many people we got online. We only have 54 viewers, so I'm sure if more is going to join us soon. Let's give them another minute or so to jump on. So today, I just wanted to jump on impromptu, so to speak, and just answer some questions, because I know you guys always have a lot of questions, as you should, because I'm sure all of you are beginning to realize now, learning music is a lifelong endeavor. It's not something you just kind of just do for a month or two and then you're good. It is a lifelong journey. I've been on this musical road for the better part of 20 years. Spent 9 of those years in university studying music at the college level. And I still oftentimes feel like there's so much I still don't know, you know, and that might come as a surprise to a lot of you, but this is still a lot of things that I still don't know. Or I might see some like crazy player do some stuff and I even have to scratch my head like, okay, I would need to spend some time with that to wrap my head around it. So saying all that to say that having questions and having doubts about your own playing is natural. The day you stop having doubts about your own playing, it's actually a bad place to be, because then that gives you the false perception that you have arrived, you've made it, and there's nothing more for you to learn. And we definitely don't want to be in that place, because music is art, music is constantly evolving, so there's always something to learn. And that means you'll always have questions. And, you know, I try to do my best to, from time to time, do these impromptu live sessions to just answer some of those questions, or just to rest your mind at ease, to let you know that, hey, it's okay that the process is slow. It is okay that some things you just don't understand, some things just go completely over your head. It's okay to be in that uncomfortable state. It's okay to feel like you're not growing, right? All of those things. It's not a bad thing. You list the problem you have, and I guarantee you, I have gone through it. I have experienced it. Which is why when I tell you, looking back now, that don't worry about it. As long as you stay focused, as long as you have an open mind, and as long as you're always willing to learn, you're fine. You'll get to where you want to be. But those things are important. You got to have an open mind. I still learn from people who think I don't have anything to learn from them, but I still do, right? I don't put myself above anyone to say because I'm this YouTuber with this big audience, I can't learn. I go to different churches, I see someone playing, and I just observe. See what I can learn from this person. And I'm always looking at the learning perspective twofold. What can I learn from an educator perspective? As a teacher, it's my job to find solutions to what students are experiencing, problems. So I always try to see, what can I learn from this player? If there's one thing I could help them or tell them to help them be a better player, what could that be? So I'm looking through the lens of a teacher, but then I'm also looking through the lens as a musician. Oh, I like the way that person interpreted that song. I like that chord they used there. Interesting. Not the one I would have used, but what they used is also pretty interesting. And so that gives me insight. So I'm always learning, always be willing, and I think that's a good place to be for all of you. Always be willing to learn and always have an open mind. Never say you have arrived. I know a lot of people like to skip over the fundamentals because they think that's not what I need, right? I need those cool chords that Warren have or those cool runs. But little do they know is that a lot of the things I do is based in fundamentals. For those of you who have been following me keenly for years, you notice I don't really venture too much into jazz territory, right? A lot of the chords and stuff we use in modern gospel really comes from jazz, but I don't really go down that rabbit hole too far. And that's a personal decision. Because it's when you go too far in that direction, for me, it loses its essence. And so I don't go too far. So a lot of the things I do that might sound cool to you is fairly simple. But why it sounds advanced or why it sounds so cool is because I'm focusing on the other elements of music, beyond just the notes, beyond just the chord. The timing. Music is time. That's a core element of music, the time. And so putting something in the right place at the right time can make all the difference. So over the years, I've started to shift my focus more on just the chords and the placement. You'll hear a lot of musicians talk about that. Placement. Another thing is how I utilize dynamics. The way you utilize dynamics can make something stand out or just be subdued. Another one is what we call phrasing. So if I'm playing a certain line or scale, just by how I phrase it. And phrasing is a combination of how you use dynamics and how you use time, right? So when you combine the two, you can phrase something so it sounds differently or it come across differently in the rhythmic spectrum. So a lot of these elements are things I've been playing around with over the past few years. And I realized with these elements, I can take fairly simple concepts and make them sound advanced. So I just want you guys to know that as you progress along your journey, it's important, again, keep that open mind to know that you don't always need a bag of chords or fancy licks and runs, even though those things have their place. But if that's your sole magic trick that you're relying on to sound good, you're missing a whole other thing that can really help your playing. And those things really lie in just really understanding the fundamentals of music. I don't even know how I got on this trend because I didn't come on here to give this speech, but it just sort of came to mind as I'm thinking about how I want to help you guys restructure your mindset, because that's another important part of the puzzle is your mindset. The way you perceive music, the way you perceive this journey will dictate if you succeed or fail. A lot of it's mindset. It has nothing to do with intelligence. It has nothing to do with whether you have access to the greatest teachers or you have the best keyboards. None of that stuff. It's your mindset can really determine how well you learn, how well you grasp concept, and how well you execute music, right? And so if you're constantly thinking that you're just never going to be able to do it, and because of all these obstacles or your location and your finances and all of that, then you won't learn. If you believe that, then it will become true, and it will become something that hinders you from making progress, right? Music is art, and so it exists outside of all these other man-made obstacles. And so I just want you guys to start to flip that switch in the mind to know that, I can do this. A lot of you look at me play and you say, man, I don't know when I will ever be able to do that. And I can tell you that 20 years ago when I was starting out, I used to look at other players and just shake my head thinking I'll never be able to play like that. Fast forward 20 years later, I've surpassed a lot of those players. I don't even know when I did, but I know that I've surpassed them. But the thing is, I never placed any one person as, oh, this is the person I want to be able to surpass, to then say I have reached. I've just never done that. I've just always wanted to learn and never be satisfied with where I'm at. Just always wanted to learn new things. And with that attitude, you'll realize that in 3, 5, 6 years, you've surpassed the goal that you set for yourself without even knowing, simply because you condition the mind that music is a journey. It's a lifelong journey, and it's just something I'll continue to learn more and more about while enjoying the process. All right, my rant is finished. Now we have 62 folks online. We've been online for an average about 3.5 minutes now. So let's jump into some Q&A. But before we start, let's set some ground rules, because I just want to make sure things flow nicely. So I got 4 ground rules that I would like everyone to adhere to as best as possible. The first one is, if you have a question, start it with the word question. This way, when I'm scrolling the chat, I can visually see the questions from just regular chat communications, right? So I want to be able to quickly see those questions. So just start with the word questions, possibly in bold, so I can see that. So that's the first point. Second point is to keep questions short and to the point. I don't want to have to read a paragraph to try to understand what you're trying to ask. Because I'm working within a limited time window here, I'm probably going to be on for about an hour and 20 minutes with you guys, depending on how things flow. And I want to be able to get to as many questions as possible. So by you keeping the question short and to the point, we can knock it out, right? So don't think about what you're trying to ask and see how you can ask that in as few words as possible. Point number 3 is to avoid complex questions that requires complex answers. This is a YouTube live, just a Q&A. So try not to ask me an entire course question. It's just going to be too long to answer and explain, right? So think about the question and say, is this something that Warren would need to create a course on for me to understand? Or is it something that he can sum up in 2 to 3 minutes? I'm looking for things that I can give you actionable tips and advice to take away and go implement right away. So avoid the long questions, complex questions that would require a complex answers. And lastly, avoid spamming the chat, right? So what I mean by that is, I know a lot of you may have a lot of questions. Sadly, I might not be able to get through all your specific questions. So give others a chance to ask questions. So if I'm seeing like 10 questions back to back to back from the same person, I'll probably just pick one and ignore the rest, because I want to make sure that I get to other people's questions. So just be mindful of that you're not spamming the chat with too much of your questions. And with that in mind, we're good to go. So let the questions roll in, and I'll just scroll and do my best to answer those questions. All right, so welcome. I see my folks coming in from Nigeria all over the place. What's up, Eugene? And Suzette, Daniel, trust you guys are doing well. Raquel had posted a question earlier, and let's just jump to it because it seems pretty straightforward. It says, I have a repetitive strain injury for 5 months from piano playing for 5 months now. It says, do you stretch out your hands before playing to prevent this? Now that's a very unique thing, Raquel. To strain your hands from just playing piano seems a bit aggressive. I've been playing for 20 years and I've never injured or strained my hands. And no, I don't do any hand stretches or anything. I mean, some people do. If you live in a part of the country that gets cold, like if you're in the United States and you live up north where, in the wintertime it drops sub-0 degrees, you may find that you want to warm up your hands. And I recommend warming up your hands just using technique exercises. So just run a few scales, run a few arpeggios. Those get the blood flowing and those act as stretch exercises. But outside of those, I don't do anything particular with my fingers to warm up, right? Having been played piano for so long, generally if you find that you're experiencing pain and you think it might stem from piano, the number one thing to go to is a few things actually. The first one is tension. Some people are naturally tight when they play, and you can see it visibly. You can see the hands, if they're like that. You see the muscles tightening up in the forearm, the shoulders. If you notice that you're playing and you feel visibly tight, that's a recipe for what you're experiencing. After months of playing with that level of tension in your body, it will start to affect you. And so the way we get rid of tension is just have to physically check in with our body and say, am I tight anywhere? And physically relax that tension. Train yourself to be relaxed when you play. And it might be hard and it might take some time, but that's the only way. You have to practice being relaxed. And whenever you notice tension, you physically relax it. If it's in your arm and you notice your hands like this, relax it. A lot of us tend to play with that fourth and fifth finger sticked out. If you notice that's you, and every time you see it, relax it. Every time you see it, relax it. And so you can put a sticky note by your keyboard that every time you see it says relaxed. And then you just check in with your body. Where in my body am I tight? Am I tight in my hip, shoulders, back? Where? Try to see if you can do a sort of an internal scan to feel where the tension is in your body. And the more you tell yourself to relax, after a while, your body will subconsciously start to do that sort of internal search for you and just relax the muscle. But that's usually the biggest cause of injury that I've come across in other players, is playing with tensions for months or even years. Eventually that will lead to injury. Another thing is just practicing for too long. I always recommend that people don't practice when they're tired. So if your day-to-day, 9-to-5 job is sort of physically involving a lot of manual work, you get out of work after an 8-hour shift and you're just beat, physically your muscles are tired, that's probably not a good time to practice because your body's already tired. And that's when your muscles easy to get tightened up because your brain is kind of like not even there 100%. So it's better to practice at times where you're physically not tired so you can focus on what you're doing. I don't sit and play piano for more than an hour at a time. Haven't done that for years. And so when people talk about, should I practice for 4 hours at a time? Absolutely not. An hour in one sitting. So if you have 3 hours to practice, don't sit there for 3 hours. I guarantee you after an hour, hour and a half, your brain chipped out. So your body might be there physically, but your brain's somewhere else. And that's when mistakes and stuff starts to creep in. So it's better to practice for an hour where you can be hyper-focused, get up, go do something else completely unrelated for a few hours, then you come back if you want to do some more practicing. But you're practicing short bursts like that. Thirdly, make sure that your instrument is set up correctly. And that is your keyboard is at the right height, your bench is at the right height. How do you know? There's some guidelines. So when you sit on your bench, your feet should be like this. So imagine this is your thigh and this is your sort of calf. It should be a 90-degree parallel to the floor. So right now I'm looking at my calf to the floor. It's like this, 90 degrees, right? So if you find that you're like this, you're sitting too high. If you find that you're like that, you're sitting too low. 90 degrees to the floor, you're right? That's how you know your bench is at the correct height. Your keyboard should just be about an inch to half an inch above your thighs, right? If it's more than that, you're too high and you're gonna find that you have to raise your hands, which means you're using your shoulder muscles to hold up your hands. And doing that for an extended period of time, those are gonna get tired, right? If your thighs can't slip right under your keyboard like that, that means your keyboard is too low. So you gotta like spread out your legs. Again, tension in your hip, which will also start to affect your lower back. You want your legs to be pretty much straight under your keyboard. Now the distance between your keyboard and your torso is based on the length of your thighs. So I recommend if this is your knee, your keyboard should be about here over your knee. You don't want it to be up here because that means it's too close and you're gonna find that you have to be playing like this. It causes restrictions. You're not able to move easily. And if your knee is not under the keyboard, it's too far, which means you have to be stretching. And again, when you have to do these stretching motions, your back and shoulder muscles are engaged to hold out your hands. But when it's, again, based on the length of your thighs, because everybody's got different length body, right? So that's why we use the thigh as an example, because that's gonna always make it proportional to the person's body. When it's just above your knee, then I'm not using any shoulder muscles or back muscles to hold up my hands. I feel I'm sitting normally. And this allows you to play in a very relaxed state without contorting your body in any weird way or your legs to facilitate. So Raquel, those are some of the things I recommend to check for to ensure that your instrument is set up correctly and that you're not injuring yourself, because carpal tunnel syndrome is a famous injury that a lot of pianists suffers from. I've been playing for 20 years and never got it. That's because I was taught these things from early, fortunately, so I was able to avoid any form of hand injury and stuff like that. Great question, though, Raquel. Great question. All right, who else got a question? Okay. Joseph says, hey Warren, could you please touch base on some licks and runs, maybe over the 5 chord or just any licks drills? Honestly, the way I think about licks, Joseph, it's always in the context of a song, you know, because most of what we do is play songs. So I don't just practice, I'm trying to think of how I can phrase this, because there are many ways of creating licks. Over the 5, over the 1, I did a video, I think I posted it yesterday, and it was titled what chord to play over, what runs to play over your chords. I think you should go back and watch that video, because in there I outlined some important things to think about. Because when we talk about licks and lines, we're talking about 2 things. Either you're playing an arpeggio or you're playing a scale. Or you can think of a third one, you're playing a combination of the 2. An arpeggio and a scale. Because if I'm playing in the key of C, when I go to the 5, I can do an arpeggio. That was just an arpeggio, right? And I kind of just walk through that 5 chord. Or I can do a combination of a scale and an arpeggio. So it's always usually a combination of arpeggio or scale that I'm doing. But what makes licks sound good is how you utilize the rhythm and the phrasing. So remember I talk about it's not just about the notes, it's about how the notes are played. So the way I'm thinking about rhythm and the way I'm thinking about phrasing is what makes my licks and my runs sound cool. So, you know, when you're sitting to practice licks, those are the things you want to keep in mind. And that's why I think it's easier to practice licks and lines in the context of a song. So take a song that you're working on and just take a section of the song, 2 or 3 progressions, and try to work out some runs and licks that you could use over those within the context of that song. And that helps to narrow things down for you as to how you're going to treat phrasing, how you're going to treat rhythms. Right? Because the way I phrase and the way I use rhythms changes based on the song. And so that's why I'm not a big fan of just practicing isolated licks, because then where do you use it? You kind of get confused. You got this kind of cool lick, but you don't know where to put it. But if you already have a song in mind while practicing this thing, then it's easier to kind of conceptualize it, because it's not isolated anymore, but you already have a context in which you're working from. But great question, great question. Okay. Question from no one. He says, what if people start after you set the ground rules? Okay, I guess that's fine. I mean, that question came in when I was reading my little ground rules. It's just to help the chat run more efficiently and for me to get through all the questions. Question from Joseph Ferry says, Would you please touch, okay, I just answered that. I guess my chat has been running back up. I just answered that one. Tanya Franklin says, how do you practice scales and arpeggios so that you can play them fluently in runs? So, first of all, you want to make sure that you're practicing your scales and your arpeggio with the correct fingerings. At this point, I have fingering charts on all of those things, scales, arpeggios for multiple scales, because having good fingering is half the battle won right there, right? If you have messed up fingering, it's going to completely affect your speed. Point number 2 is that you should be monitoring the speed at which you can play your scales and arpeggio. Over in my program, I have a practice path that allow people to sort of give them guidelines to let them know at what speed they should be practicing their arpeggio as they progressed along the program. But that's something that you should be monitoring. And the goal is every week or two, you should be increasing your metronome speed at which you practice your scales and arpeggio. That allows you to get faster and faster because you want to do it incrementally. You don't want to just get up and say, I'm going to practice fast. We don't practice speed just like that. We work our way up to speed, right? And so you gradually increase your metronome mark by, 3 to 5 clicks every week or every other week. And the goal is that every time you increase your metronome, you can still maintain the same clarity and the same control. Because when I'm practicing, for example, my C major arpeggio, see, I feel comfortable, clean. You can hear all the notes. If I double the speed, you can still hear all the notes clean and it's still in time. I still have control over my timing and my speed. I don't start to fumble all of a sudden. And so that's why we practice these things incrementally, so that as we're increasing speed, we can still also maintain the clarity. Now, one of the sort of little secret technique that allows my arpeggios and scales to sound smooth when I'm practicing, let's get this thing out of the way, is the way I use my sustain pedal. So I'm always using my sustain pedal, so that's why you'll see me do stuff like, right? I got all kind of wires here messing me up, getting in my way. Okay, here we go. So I always use my pedal. So I step on the pedal and I run the same arpeggio, and I can do it fast, right? But I didn't just get up and start practicing it at that speed. I start slowly to allow myself to have control, right? So I gradually been practicing these things for over 20 years. Same thing with my scales, So then when times for me come to do, or I didn't just wake up and say I'm going to practice at that speed. I worked my way up. And I know it's a slow process, but if there was a quicker way to do it, I would have figured it out. But that's how you develop solid control over your scales and arpeggio. It's a daily step-by-step process that is monitored. Set milestones and goals for yourself so that you can see your progress over the span of 3 months, 6 months. And again, over at pianolessonwithwarren.com, we have a great practice path program that have these things already built in for people so they can easily see their progress within a matter of days, because there are guidelines. So you know when to move on and what you should be practicing your speed at and all of that good stuff. But that's how you develop speed. Great question. I don't remember who asked that question because the chat moved. All right, let's jump to another question. Well, that was from Tanya. Tanya was the one that asked that question. Leno Grace says, can you explain modal mixture? Great question. So modal mixture, let's just back it up. So in Western music, we tend to play in two modes, major and minor. Those are modes, right? Mode's just another name for a scale, and there are dozens of scales. But as it relates to how Western music functions, a song is either going to be in a major key or a minor key. We call that two different modes, major mode, minor modes. Oftentimes, what we've been doing in gospel music over the past couple of years, we've been blending those two modes. So we've been borrowing chords from the minor key and using them in the major key. We call that modal mixture, because you're using chord that doesn't belong to the key. So in the key of C major, right, in all white keys, and we know that the 1 is major, the 2 is minor, the 3 is minor, 4 is major, 5 is major, 6 is minor, 7 is diminished. Those are the diatonic chords for the major key, right? But if I start to use non-diatonic chords that derives from the minor key, then I am doing modal mixture. For example, if I am doing, let's just do some random progressions. So I'm on my 4, 6, 4. Now what happens if I go to minor 4? Back to my 1. By me throwing in that minor 4, I'm borrowing that chord from the parallel minor, which is C minor. The 4 chord is supposed to be major in a minor key. So me making it into a minor, I'm mixing the modes, right? Because I'm borrowing chords from the minor key. Let's continue that same concept, right? So, do you guys know the song by William McDowell, Praise is What I Do? Praise is what I do, but I wanna be close to you. I pray, da 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 da, and I vow to praise you, right? Through the good and the bad, I praise you. Whether happy or sad, I praise you. In all that I go through, because praise is what I do. Then praise is what I do. Modal mixture is what I do. Right? So that's a perfect example of modal mixture. Went straight to the parallel minor by introducing E flat major 7, B flat major 7, back to C major 7. You know, so we're borrowing chords from that parallel minor, and that's what modal mixture is. Now, that's at surface level. Just like anything else, modal mixture has a rabbit hole that goes very deep. And if you look into some jazz stuff, that's when you'll see just how crazy it gets. Because the example I just sort of showed you is based on major minor key. But remember, we talked about there are dozens of other modes. You know, we can talk about some other jazz modes or modes derived from the minor scales. And so we can build chords based on those modes as well and use them in major keys. So modal mixture is really just going outside of the scale that you're playing in. So if we're playing in a major key and we start to dip into these other modes, either melodically and harmonically, that's modal mixture. And so by extension, when you hear we talk about passing chords, really what we're doing as well is also adding elements of modal mixture, because passing chords involve a lot of times chords that doesn't belong to the key. So we're mixing the modes. Great question though, Leno. Great question. Question from Samuel says, what is the best way to improve your sense of rhythm when I'm playing? It's important to know that rhythm is something we feel. It starts first from here. You need to be able to, this might sound weird, but do you dance, Samuel? I used to be an avid dancer. I know I don't look it, but actually in my college years, I used to be a pretty good Latin dancer. I used to teach salsa, bachata, and cha-cha, all of the Latin dances. Because in Jamaica, which is where I grew up, there's a lot of Cubans. So I learned how to dance salsa from the Cubans. And, just growing up in Jamaica as well, it's a very rhythmic culture. So rhythm has always been something that's embedded in me. So I could feel rhythm here. And so it's important to know that when we talk about rhythm, you first have to start work on it internally. Now, this is a tricky one, because how does one work on their internal rhythm? Honestly, I haven't thought much about that. I don't know. But I do know that it's good to start practicing to feel the rhythm here, right? Before you start thinking about it intellectually, you want to be able to start feeling it internally. But from a practical standpoint, some things that you can start to do to get rhythmic in your playing, you've got to copy. Before I learned all these crazy chords and harmony and theory and all of that stuff, I was just copying what people do. Oh, I like the way that guy played that run, the way he used the rhythm there, so I tried to practice it, right? So copying has its place. So if you don't really have that internal rhythm yet, copy what you see other players do. I mean, start within reason, right? So you don't want to get the most complex things and try to copy that. We'll start simple. But when you're listening to a song, don't just learn the chords. Listen to how the rhythmic structure is put together. And we don't always have to derive rhythm from the keyboard player. A lot of the rhythmic stuff that I learned is from guitarists. Guitarists sometimes are master of rhythms. So if you're listening to a song, listen to what the guitar player is doing and see if you can mimic some of that on the keyboard. Listen to what the drummer is doing, the way he's playing on the hi-hats and stuff, and see if you can mimic some of that on the keyboard. And so rhythm is always around in music. You don't always have to try to find a keyboard player to learn that from. But copy what you hear. And that's a great way to start to feel rhythm. In addition, it's great to practice to either a metronome or a drum beat. One of the beauty about a lot of those Yamaha and Casio keyboards that I like is that a lot of them come with the built-in keyboard rhythms already. Dozens of them. And so when you're practicing chord progressions, don't just practice boring, isolated progressions. Find a cool little pop jazz beat or a pop funk beat, put that on, and just practice your progression to that, groove to that. Try to come up with little rhythmic ideas based on the beat you're hearing. I don't practice anything by myself by keyboard. I always got a little drum beat going. And at this stage, a lot of phones now have free apps, drum apps that you can just download, put your headphones in, and play to that. And so I'd always recommend when you're practicing your scales, everything needs to be done to a metronome. So you get used to the concept of hearing coop, coop, coop. After a while, even when there's no metronome, you hear that tapping. That's the internal beat coming alive right there. You start to feel it internally, and that's where rhythm lives. That's what we're trying to awaken. It's not necessarily these. These are the vehicle that helps you to be efficient. But the rhythm doesn't come from here, it comes from here. At least that's the way I think about it. So hopefully that helps Samuel on the rhythmic part. Question from Keeson Music Academy says, could you play the Nigerian national anthem? No idea what that is, unfortunately. I barely remember how to play the Jamaican national anthem because I haven't played it in years. Question from, no, that's not a question. A question from Collins. Collins says, how to actually get master a transpose? I think I understand what you're asking, Collins, is how do you transpose a song to another key without using the transpose button? So the way you should think about it, first of all, convert all the chords to their numeric value. Remember we talked about the number system? So you want to think about chords in numbers, 1, 6, 4, 5. Once you get those chords converted to number, then you go to the new key and you find the numeric representation of those chords and then practice it that way. Now, if you're talking about instant, there's no such thing as instant. If you've never done it before, it's going to take time for you to wrap your head around it. And that's why I always tell people, avoid getting attached to chord names, right? So when you're playing, you don't want to be like F major 7, A minor 9. You know, if you're constantly thinking about your chords in letters, when time comes for you to play that same song in a new key, your brain has been so conditioned to think about the letters of the chord that it messes you up when you have to then try to play in a new key. So if you've been practicing to just think about your chords in terms of numbers, even when they're extended. So even when I'm playing an F major 9, I don't think F major 9, I just think the 4. Oh, I'm on the 4. Oh, I'm on the 3. I'm on the 6. I'm on the 2. Even though it's a dominant 9 now, I'm not thinking about the qualities. I'm just thinking about their numeric position. And so when time comes for me to transpose chords to new key, it's easy because I haven't gotten too attached to their letter names. I'm more attached to their numeric position in the key. So that's one way to begin to work on transposition. Question from Paul. Paul says, are secondary dominants and diminished half-step chords good choices to start inserting passing chords towards a gospel sound? Absolutely. Gospel is rooted in blues. You can't really have gospel without that bluesy undertone. And that bluesy undertone comes from the blues scale and dominant 7th chords. So you're not going to find gospel music with, and I'm talking about more like that churchy gospel sound. You're not going to get that sound with a bunch of minor 7ths and major 7th chords. It's the dominant sound chords that it comes with, right? So if I'm doing like, this is a day, this is a day that the Lord has made. I will rejoice, I will rejoice and be glad in Him. This is a day that the Lord, you know what I'm saying? All of my chords are dominant 7th. When I'm on the 1, 4, 5, 6, 2, 5, 1. So the diminished sound and the dominant 7th sound is the bedrock of that gospel sound. So yes, if you're trying to make anything sound more gospel, you gotta be eyeing those dominant 7 and diminished 7 chords heavily, along with the blues scale. So even when I'm like walking my bass, I am utilizing more bluesy tones from the blues scales and less major scale, more blues scale. Walk through those blue notes and you'll start to hear that sound start to sound heavily gospel. Great question, Paul. Leo says, can you share your thoughts about voicing when you accompany singers in slow songs when the song has a break? Are you thinking chord tones before the singer starts singing again, passing tones? That's actually a great question, Leo, because I was going to shoot a video on that. In fact, today my question was, do I shoot the video on accompanying a singer or do I just go live? I'll probably post that video next week if I'm able to get to it. But a great question. When you're accompanying a singer and you think about voicing, I like to do two things. I like to either voice to the melody, and for those of you, by extension, for those of you who mess around with TikTok, head over to Piano Lesson with Warren on TikTok. What I've been doing over there is a little bit different than what I'm doing on YouTube. I've been doing a lot of duets on TikTok. And for those of you wondering what's a duet, it's when you see the two people side by side. And what I've been doing is just finding people singing and accompanying them on TikTok. And you get an insight as to how I'm thinking about accompanying for that particular singer, because my technique changes based on what the singer's doing. That's a great way to see how I think about accompanying a singer. But back to your question. I voice to the melody, right? So if I'm playing, if I'm in the key of C, I'm playing a C chord, and the singer's on a G, I'll sometimes voice my chord to that G. And when we talk about voicing, we're talking about which note goes on the top. So if the singer's on a G, I'll sometimes voice to that G. Now, voicing to the melody note of the singer becomes more crucial the more dissonant you go. So once we get to those dark passing chords, to really make it sound good, you want to voice more towards the melody tone. That also helps the singer hold their pitch, especially if you're playing for a singer who is not that experienced vocally. You don't want to throw them off, so it's good sometimes to voice to the melody. Outside of that, I like to voice to either a third above the singer or a third below the singer. So again, let's take that C chord for example. If the singer's on a G, sometimes I'll voice my chord like this. So I'm voicing a third below the singer. Or sometimes I might voice a third above the singer. In the case of that C, I might voice, if it's a 7th chord, I might voice that B flat. Right? Or sometimes I might just voice the C. So it creates a more consonant sound. But 90% of the time when I'm playing, that's how I'm thinking about voicing. Third below, third above, or to the melody note. Now, these are not absolutes. You can, the 10% of the time I'm not voicing to either of those. But you find that these are good guidelines to make sure that you stay within the realm of being in harmony with the singer when you're voicing your chords. And like I said, the more your chords get extended and the more passing chords you're utilizing, voicing to these options that I'm recommending becomes more crucial. And I believe your question had a second part to it. Where was it? Yeah, you said slow songs when the singer has a break. Now, when the singers have break, like they may have a few beats of silence, it's actually not even important what you voice there, because the singer is not singing. So that's usually where you might hear keyboardists go wild and do some chromatic runs or something, because there's no singing happening there. It's kind of like your little time to shine. But again, if you're playing with an inexperienced singer that need to hear that melody tone that they're supposed to come back in, that's something keyboard players have to be mindful of. You got to take into account the skill level of the singer they're playing for, or the skill level of the congregation. If you know that they need to hear that melody tone to stay on pitch, even if you might go wild with a run or a chord, make sure that you resolve that to that melody tone that they're supposed to come back in on, so that they can get that pitch, So the way I play and the way I voice chords changes based on my environment. If I'm playing for a singer that's good, I know I can go wild because that singer will follow me. Experienced singer will bend their voice to go wherever you go. It becomes a conversation at that point, a musical conversation. And I'm sure you guys have come across YouTube videos where you see that sort of conversational singer between either an organist and a singer or a pianist and a singer, where they're going back and forth. But again, you don't want to just do that with every singer. You got to know who you're working with. But those are some pointers that I keep in mind when I'm playing for people I'm not really sure of where they lie with their skill. Paul Puletti says, okay, I just answered that question again. Let's look at, I hate when I scroll and the chat just, because then I have to scroll back up to see where I was, because I don't want to miss anyone's question. Okay, here we go. From Jordan. Jordan says, what advice would you give someone who is going to lead a choir and or praise and worship team to bring forth beautiful music? Great question, because in my previous church, I was the music director for the church for 9 years. So I directed the choir, the band, everything. My advice would be to listen. Listen to the people that you're going to be working with. It's sometimes when someone's given that position, they come in as the leader and they just forget about what everybody thinks, because I am the music director, I am the leader, and so whatever I say go. You don't want to sort of come in with that sort of dictatorship vibe. It's good to, especially if it's a group that's already been established, like they've been doing their thing for a few years, and now you're coming in, they have a certain culture established. It's important to kind of feel where that culture is, right? And try to work within their parameters while trying to introduce new things. Because if not, you create discords, and some people might just split, just leave the group. And I had to deal with that at my last church. It's a group that's been around for years. Their music director left, and I came in, take over, and I quickly realized that I had to meet them where they're at. I can't just come in and just say, all the songs that you've been singing for the last 10 years, forget it. Here's the next 50 songs we're gonna, you can't make those kind of drastic changes. So work with the songs that they've been working with. Rely on the people who know what they're doing. So in a group, a choir, song service, a group, there's always gonna be a few singers who are good, right? So you kind of wanna follow their lead, because the other people in the group are also following their lead, right? So you're working within their skill level, and you're also trying to be receptive to their wants and needs. So if they say, Jordan, the key for this is too high, can we lower it? Don't say, nope, this is the original key that the song was done in. A big one I remember back then was total praise. Not every soprano can hit them notes in total praise. So I've had to lower that song sometimes 3 keys lower for groups that I've worked with. But that's the thing, you gotta work with the voices you have. So but while over time, sort of challenging them to take on more complex repertoire or to expand their musical palette, but you have to do those things diplomatically. And you find that they'll appreciate you for that. So in other words, Jordan, I think it's not even so much about musical abilities. It's about just making sure that you're making people feel comfortable and know that at the end of the day, they're there to worship. It's not about putting on a show or concert. And so you're trying to make them sound as good as they can with the ability they have. And like I said, by over time, slowly challenging them. Because one of the things I had to eventually implement with my group is some vocal lessons. I was a vocal minor in college, so I picked up some stuff about vocal training. That would spend 10 minutes before a rehearsal, just going over those warm-up and exercises. And then after a while, they love them. But I didn't just go in day one and say, y'all need to start doing all these stuff when they've never done anything like that before. So that's just what I would recommend to you. Be open-minded and let them know that you're there to help. You're on their side. You're not there to dictate to them what they're supposed to be doing. And work within their skill level while slowly introducing them to new things over time. All right? Great question, though. Question from Adeboya. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly, my brother. Sorry. It says, can you show how to voice chords when playing with a choir? So this is an example where I would need a specific song and a specific section to show you, because there's no one voicing for no one song, right? Your voicing changes based on the song. And again, I kind of explained that earlier. Was it Leo who asked that question? Yeah, Leo asked that question. Hopefully you got that answer, my brother, about how I think about voicing. It's not a universal thing. We don't voice chords the same way for every song. It changes based on what's going on with the melodic content of the song. A question from Chifranoro Music. It says, any formula for harmonizing melody lines? I have a couple great videos right here on YouTube on that. Just type in how to harmonize a melody or playing chords with a melody. by Warren, and you should see some videos come up. I think those videos have a lot of information that would be more beneficial than me trying to explain that here live, because it's a little bit more complex to explain all of that. Question from City Anayo says, I play and rehearse well on my piano, but I find it is a bit difficult to adapt when I move to other piano. Is this normal? Yes, it's kind of like wearing someone else's shoe. Even though the shoe might be the same size as yours, it's going to feel uncomfortable, because over time your shoe contours to your own foot. It's the same thing with the piano. Even though the keys are sort of standard and everything, it's going to feel differently, because keyboards vary in their dexterity, right? Or what we call the weightedness of the key. You know, they're varying weightedness of the keys. And our body will pick up that, right? If it's 3 ounces lighter than your keyboard or 3 ounces heavier, your hand's gonna feel the difference. So yes, it is normal to feel a little weird when you're sitting on a new keyboard, but it shouldn't be to the detriment of where you start making mistakes left, right, and center. If that's happening, the issue is probably more psychological than physical, right? But yes, when you go to a new keyboard, I mean, I got 4 keyboards here laid out. I'm on one, and each of them feel differently, even though I've been playing all 4 for a while. But they all have different density and weightedness. They all sound differently, right? So I even approach how I play them because they sound differently, the tone and the texture. Some have a heavier bass end, some have a crisper highs. And so I alter my playing based on those elements, right? So all of that to take into account will make it feel a little bit different. And so yeah, that is completely normal for you to feel that when you use different keyboards. The question, okay, that wasn't a question. Question from Sayan Kumar says, can you please demonstrate how to practice making chords sound smooth and in time? Now the in time, let's start with the in time part. The in time part comes from practicing with a metronome or a drum pattern. And I talked about that earlier. We don't just randomly develop timing or playing in time like that. It's got to be something we practice. So I was explaining earlier, when I'm practicing chord progression, I'm always doing so either to a metronome or a drum beat. Now, I'm highly biased towards drum beat. I prefer to practice the drum beat over just a standard tick, tock, tick, because with a drum beat, you're taking into account a certain feel. With a metronome, it's just purely time. But music don't just exist in just time. It's time and feel. And so when you play to a drum beat, it allows you to sort of start thinking about the feel of the beat that you're playing to. So if you're struggling with timing issue, that drum beat needs to be your best friend. How to make it sound smooth? Now there are a couple things. Your sustain pedal is key. At this point, anybody who's playing without a sustain pedal, you're committing blasphemy. Sustain pedal is as important as any other elements of the keyboard. You can't achieve that smooth sound without a sustain pedal. Now, if you're wondering, Warren, what's the best sustain pedal to get? I always tell people to get this one. It's the Yamaha FC4A. It is one of the best sustain pedal I've come across in my life, and I've gone through dozens of pedal in my lifetime. Simply because it doesn't break. A lot of the other sustain pedals I have, just after a while, it stopped working. I've had this specific brand for about 4 years now, and it worked just as good, and it works on all keyboards. And that's the other important thing. You want a pedal that just works on any keyboard, right? Plug and play. And the other thing I like about it, it has a certain weight to it, so it doesn't move around, you know, when you're playing and your pedal keeps moving around because it's too light. It also has these nice rubber things, so if you're playing like a wood surface that is smooth, it's more likely to stick because of the rubber, right? So everybody needs a sustain pedal. When you're practicing chord progressions, you need to practice chord progressions with the pedal. The only thing I don't practice with pedal is like arpeggios and scales, because you want to be able to play those cleanly and correctly without the aid of the pedal. But when you're practicing chords, you want to get used to playing with the pedal so you learn how to play chords with the pedal, because it's going to require a little bit of a learning curve to play with the pedal if you haven't been doing so. right? And then from there, it's just learning how to pedal. Now, I have also a YouTube video, how to use a sustain pedal. Go type that into YouTube, how to use a sustain pedal by Warren. And in there, I outline some important tips because there's a technique towards pedaling to ensure that the chords aren't bleeding into each other. And I think that video explains it nicely. So those, Sean, would be my pointers as to how you can improve your smoothness and your timing. Richard says, how can you hear chord qualities and chord progressions? This also comes from training. Now, if you haven't heard about my ear training app yet, Active Ear, that's a great place to start. I think I have done a good job in outlining ear training. Because ear training, we don't just arrive at chords and say, you know, I'm trying to learn chords by ear. We have to start with intervals and work our way up to hearing chords, right? So if you can't hear and identify intervals yet, you're not going to be able to hear and identify chords. So go download Active Ear. That's ACTIVEEAR. Just go to your app store, whichever phone you got, search Active Ear, download that and get started. And that will eventually allow you to be able to listen to a song and tell the chord. But it's a process. Question from E. Dingo says, what is your favorite breakfast? Sorry, it's not a musical related, but I thought it would be nice to give you a short break. Breakfast. You know, my breakfast has changed over the years. Right now, I kind of, you know, I like eggs in the morning, a little bacon, wheat bread. I'm not a big fan of white bread. Wheat bread. That's mostly coffee. Yeah, I like my coffee. I'm particularly biased Starbucks. I don't even make my own coffee. I just drive down the street to Starbucks, get me that venti Americano. For those of you who don't have Starbucks or live outside the United States, you probably don't know what I'm talking about. But for my US folks, they probably know. So I'm a big Starbucks coffee guy. But that's pretty much my breakfast. Now, when I used to live in the islands, we used to do like breadfruit, and you guys know the ackee, and saltfish. That was a big one. Yam. I'm a big fan of white yam. Now, I don't eat like that anymore. I just, maybe because I'm older, I can't consume all that carbs. Love me some dumplings. But that's just pretty much what I used to eat for breakfast, and that's how I eat now. Yeah. I'm also a late eater. I don't have breakfast before 10 a.m. most mornings. Partly because I work from home, so there's no rush for me to get out the door and anything like that. But yeah, that's pretty much when I have breakfast. Great little icebreaker question. That was fun. Okay. Question from Good Luck Abraham says, can you explain rootless voicing and how to approach it in all chords of a major scale? Rootless voicing, first of all, let's just explain what that is. It simply means playing a chord without the root. Now, we predominantly use rootless voicings when we're using extended chords. So 7ths, 9ths, 11ths, 13ths, and so on. We don't really use rootless voicings in a triad because a triad is 3 notes. We remove the root, it's no longer a chord really, it's just 2 notes. But if I'm playing like this chord, a C13th, then I may come up and voice it like this. That's the root, and that's my chord. So I might go. That's, I'm thinking F major 7. Rootless voicing. That's G altered. Right? So that's how I use rootless voicing. It's really mostly used among jazz guys. It's used in gospel too. But you find the keyboard players and the organists doing a lot of rootless voicings when they're playing with a bass player. Because when you have a bass player, it simply means you don't have to play the root at all. Because you already have a bass player doing the roots. So that means it frees up the keyboard player to do a lot of rootless voicings. Now that doesn't mean when you're playing with a bass player, you always have to use rootless voicing. It just means now you have that option. As it relates to now how to practice that, again, a little bit too complex of a question to explain all of that here. But I do have a course over at pianolessonwithwarren.com talking about rootless voicings and giving you different ways of voicing some of these chords. Because rootless voicing is, again, a rabbit hole that goes pretty deep. But it's just to note that it is predominantly used when we're using extended harmonies. That's where it makes more sense to use it. So if you're just still playing triads, you don't need to worry about rootless voicing chords right now. Robert Sam says, how do I find all the chords in a song using scales? So that's really linked towards ear training, Robert, you know, because finding chords for the song is not a guessing game. There's a method to it that is rooted in ear training and transcription. That is not something, unfortunately, I can sum up or give you the pointers. But again, over at pianolessonwithwarren.com, I have tons of material that deals with this. We even have a club over there called Transcription Club, where we do weekly transcription assignment, and I outline the tips as to how to go about figuring out the chords for these songs. I think we just completed transcription assignment number 16, so we've done 16 different songs, and I teach folks how to transcribe all of those songs, how to go about doing it. Tommy Robinson is in the chat right now. She's a part of Transcription Club. She can tell you just how well it has helped her. Now Tommy can listen to most songs and figure out the chords on her own. So it is something that takes practice. And what I do over at pianolessonwithwarren.com is guide students as to how to do it, so they're not trying to do trial and error. Kendrick Ross says, I have learned the circle of fourth using 7-3-5-2-5-1 4 for major scales. Is there an equivalent for minor? You can do the same thing in minor. The chords would just be different. It still work out to be the same, sort of going through the cycles of fourth. You just have to make sure that you're accounting for the chord quality in this minor key. Wilson says, is there an easy exercise to help you become better at finding any chord on the fly? Because when you start playing inversions, the fingering changes and you have to find the next chord. Unfortunately, on the fly, and it doesn't exist when it comes to ear training, my friend, there is no easy way. Ear training has to become the bedrock of something you practice regularly. As it relates to playing gospel by ear, if that's you guys' desires, which I'm sure it is, ear training has to become a functional part of your regular exercises and training. If you don't pay attention to ear training, it will never get better. We are not going to just wake up one day and be able to hear all these chords and figure out all these chords on the fly. It takes a while before you get to the on-the-fly moment. So again, I would refer for my ear training app for those of you who are wanting to get into a more regimental training of the ear. That's where it starts. And then from there, we move on to transcribing songs. You gotta transcribe a lot of songs. And by transcription, we just mean you pick a song and you spend the next 5 days, if you need to, figuring out the chords of that song at your keyboard. And if you're wondering, how do I go about doing that? Again, Piano Lesson with Warren has step-by-step course outline how to go about transcription, because there is a process to that as well. It's not by trial and error. There are specific things that I've outlined what you guys should be listening for and how to avoid pitfalls and so on. That's what your training really is before we get to the on-the-fly moment. Kamiya says, how to improve the sense of using secondary chords with simple voicing in hymns. Bahamas from Uganda. Branamas from Uganda. Sounds like you're talking about reharmonization, my friend. How to reharm hymns. That also takes some time, and it requires an understanding of using reharmonization chords. Again, concepts that I talk about in my program. And when you head over to pianolessonwithwarren.com, I have dozens of song tutorials over there. In every song, I do 3 levels. I do a beginner's version of the song, an intermediate version of the song, and an advanced version of the song. In the advanced versions of the song, they're all reharmonized versions. So I show you how to take the beginner's version and how to reharmonize it without it losing its essence. So when we talk about secondary chords, we're talking about chord substitutions and reharmonizations. And that also, there's a process to it and a method, which is a little bit too complex to explain on this live. But I do have programs already recorded, sitting, waiting for you over at pianolessonwithwarren.com. Ralph says, tips to play a good accompaniment with a singer. Again, this is another, you guys are asking a lot of complex questions. A voice, let me see if I can summarize real quick. When you're playing with a singer, you have to listen to the singer. You got to remember that your role is purely accompanimental. It's not to shine shine above the singer. You're trying to support the singer to as much as best of your possibility. So you have to be listening. And what I listen for when I'm playing to a singer is their breathing. Every singer, before they sing their next note, they're going to have to take a breath. That's what you're listening for. The reason why you need to be paying attention to those breaths, it ensures that you're not dragging down the singer, making them sing slower than they want to, or forcing the singer to sing faster than they want to. Now, the faster one is usually the culprit that most keyboard players are doing. They're pushing the song faster than the singer needs to. Drummer does this too, because you're not listening to the breath. That's how you make sure that you're timing them, so that you're playing the chords at the right place, is by listening to their breath. Secondly, you need to pay attention to the singer's dynamic. When the singer goes loud and big, you got to go loud and big with her or him. That's where you start try to do. When they go loud and big, I go loud and big. Another thing to listen for is when the singer is slowing down. Singers gradually slow down. You know, like. And I lift my hands in total praise to you. You are the source of my strength. You are the strength of my life, and I lift my hands in total praise. You know what I'm saying? So when the singer starts to slow down, you have to slow down with them at the same tempo. Now, oftentimes when a singer is slowing down, they're also getting quieter. You have to get quieter with them. So that's when I shift to more of the upper register, so it doesn't sound too loud and too big. So those are just some things to keep in mind when you're playing for a singer, right? And it all falls under the umbrella of listening to that breathing. That's it. All right, who else we got? We're making some we're making good stride here. Very good questions coming in. And I lost my chat again. Let me see, where was I? YouTube Mask Hack says, hey Warren, 15-year-old player from England. Wow, my friend, welcome. He says, in our church, we play basic CCM. And for those who are wondering what CCM is, it stands for Contemporary Christian Music. We play basic CCM and it gets kind of boring. Do you have any advice to add some spice to the basic progression? Thanks. Yes, because a lot of times people think to make a song sound better, I need more chords. Wrong. To make a song sound better, you need more rhythm and more melody. So if I'm playing this song like Elevation Worship, are you hurting and broken within, overwhelmed by the weight of your sins? Jesus is calling. Have you come to the end of yourself? Do you thirst for a drink from the well? Jesus is calling. My audio is chipping out. So if you're playing that song, just fix it. And that's all you're doing. You're just playing chords like that, right? It's going to get boring real quick. So what he starts to do is adding some rhythm to it. So then I would get to like, are you hurting and broken within, overwhelmed by the weight of your sins? Jesus is calling. Oh, come to Father's arm, was bought with the precious blood. See what I'm doing? Rhythm. I start to add arpeggios in that left hand, little melodic lines in that right hand. I didn't even talk about extending the passing chords or nothing like that yet. All I did was start to add some rhythm to the song and some melodic line. Now, I know I'm oversimplifying it because you might say, Warren, I still can't do what you just did. And I understand. I'm giving you the core principle that I'm working from. And from that, over time, you'll be able to make your rhythms more complex and your melodic line more in-depth. But you have to start there. It's rhythms that you're missing. And that's why I recommend everybody practice to a backing track, right? A good thing with a lot of them CCM, they always have guitars in there. See if you can pick up on some of the rhythmic patterns and elements from the guitar and start to add those to the keyboard. But that's really where you want to start with, rhythms and melodic lines, because passing chords don't really work for CCM. It's more in the rhythmic elements and melodic contour that you're going to find a lot of nuggets of just cool musical things that you can rely on. Jacob says, what are some good points or good tips for improvising scales? I literally just did a video on that yesterday. But just to summarize here, first of all, as it relates to the more practical, when you're improvising, you really want to stay within the chord tones and the scale tones, right? So if I'm playing a C major 7 over here, I try to make sure that a lot of the notes that I'm playing here reflects this. Right? A lot of them, the notes I'm relying on, really derived from that C major. My sounds keep disappearing. A lot of the notes I'm playing derived from, just notes of that C chord. Now you can start to embellish some of those with grace notes, like when you see I go up here. Grace notes. Now you see, I'm just playing 2 chords, C major 7 to F major 7. But what I'm doing, I'm not just, again, relying on notes. It's how I'm using those notes. my placement, my rhythm, and my phrasing. Not every note is played at the same volume or at the same speed. All right, improv, I'm not gonna lie, it is one of the last skill I learned, how to improvise, because it does require a certain level of control over your arpeggios, your scale, and you gotta be able to think fast on the spot, because that's what it's called, improvising. You're literally making things up on the spot. So it's not an easy skill to learn, especially if you still haven't really developed a good foundational technique. You haven't really got a good grasp over your scales and arpeggios. It's going to be a struggle, to be honest. But from just the more how do I approach it, it's those are the elements. Scales, arpeggios, rhythm, placement, and phrasing. And those things develop over time because we're talking about vocabulary, melodic vocabulary, rhythmic vocabulary. And just like a child who has limited vocabulary, limited words that they can use when they're speaking, but that vocabulary increases the more words they learn. It's the same thing. The more you practice improvisation, the more your melodic line improves vocabulary, and the more your rhythmic vocabulary also improves. Great question. All right, who am I missing now? Let's take a look at Ayormi. Anyormi, I think, again, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, says, how do you know the chord quality of a particular melody in the voicing to use? That particularly comes from experience. So even if someone comes to me with an original song, something I've never heard before, never been recorded, from just listening to them sing it, I can tell what chords would most likely work for that melodic line. And that comes from experience, you know. So ear training, transcription, and practicing of songs. That's really how you develop that chord vocabulary to be able to tell the melody. Because outside of that, there is no practical way to say 2 + 2 = 4, that's the chord. There just isn't. It has to stem from something that you've been working on. Samson says, can you please throw more light on drop 2? You know, to be honest, Samson, drop 2 is not something I use frequently. I rarely use it. But just to outline the concept of it, there's actually a video I have here that I did with Corey Taylor, not a YouTuber. If you type in drop 2 voicing, Warren or Corey, you should see that video. And he explains it very well. But what it simply means is you're taking the second highest note in the chord and you're putting that in the bass. So if I play a C major 7, the second highest chord is the chord that is closest, second highest note is the note that is closest to the top. And that goes in the bass. That would be a drop 2 voicing. If I'm playing just a C major and a drop 2 voicing, that's drop 2. So you might hear players do stuff like, so that's sort of a progression using drop 2. It has a very cool, unique sound to it. But it's just not something I use a lot because most of the playing I do is solo piano, meaning it's just me alone. And so while drop 2 voicing can still be used in solo piano, you know you need to hear that root of the chord. So that's why drop 2 doesn't play well when doing solo piano for extended periods of time. So that's basically what drop 2 is in a nutshell. All right. Leo says, is your program just for gospel musician? So no, not Leo, Lee Cornwall. Yes, Lee, my program is centered around training gospel musicians. And the reason why I want to make that distinction is because the songs that you're going to learn are going to be all gospel songs. But the concepts that I teach can be applied to any genre and style of music. In fact, I got a lot of people in my program who aren't gospel musicians, meaning their goal and their desire isn't to learn gospel music or even play in church. But the concepts and the way I teach, regardless of the style of music that you're interested in, my concepts are going to be important. Because I play every genre of music, believe me. I used to play in rock, blues band, I've played in salsa band, obviously gospel band, I played in R&B bands, I played in reggae bands. You name a genre of music and I can play it and play it authentically. So studying multiple styles is something I have spent years doing. I have just decided in my remaining time on earth, I want to kind of focus on gospel music based on just my personal convictions. But the concepts that you learn in my program can be applied to whatever you want to learn. And there are a lot of people currently in my program doing that. But I just wanted to make the distinction that if you want to learn songs that are non-gospel songs, unfortunately, you won't find that in my program. But all the theoretical and ear training and passing chord concept and all that stuff we talk about, which are going to be unique for, not unique, what are going to be needed for regardless of the style you're in, you can definitely learn those things from me as well. And the reason why it's important is because a lot of you don't know, I was trained as a classical pianist, meaning I spent 9 years in college studying classical piano. And you might say, Warren, then how you learn all these passing chords? And great question. It just goes to show that the style of music you study doesn't mean you're limited to that style. While I was studying classical music, I was making sure that I learned how to play jazz and gospel and everything else. Because I've got to realize that, oh, okay, all of these things are the same. It's the same language. It's the same way chords are used. It's just in a stylistically different way. And so you can totally be trained as a gospel pianist and then use that knowledge to transfer to whatever other style of music you want to learn. Anyway, guys, I can take one or two more questions and then I got to wrap up. I know a lot of questions are coming in, but it just wouldn't have been possible to get through all of these without spending 4 hours on YouTube, if not longer. So I'm going to just scroll and see if there are questions that I haven't covered yet and touch on that. Francis says, hey Warren, what's your advice on how to build yourself as a music director from scratch? The first thing I would say is pay attention to other directors. You know, there's an important saying that would say, there's no need to recreate the wheel, right? Which is just mean there's no need to spend time out there researching things that has already been established, right? So you want to learn a particular skill, find people who already are doing the things that you want to do. And just watch what they do. See what you can learn from them, right? So go to attend a church that already have an established music director. See what you can learn from them. And what's even most importantly, if you can make friends with that person, do it. And just pick their brains. But that's what I find is if I want to learn a new skill, instead of just trying to just scour the internet, find a real person that already knows how to do that and just watch them. Right? And so, you know, the good news is music director is something you can observe. It's not something that you kind of have to, that's done behind the scene. Observe what they do, how they conduct themselves. And like I said, if you get the opportunity to talk to one of them, make friends with one of them, that's even better. But that's how you learn how to do music directorship. Learn some of the standardized way. Because even when you learn some of those standardized way, you're still going to have to tweak the position based on your own church, right? So it's kind of like when we go to school. You know, if you go to school for carpentry or for engineering, you learn a bunch of theory and some practical, but then when you're actually given a job after graduation, you realize that you kind of have to tweak the knowledge to fit the current situation you're in. And so that's important to know, that while you may pick up some things from people, it's important to note that you may need to just use your own intuition when you're in that position to make sure that you can function for that position and not just for some idea what you think a music director should be. You know, you want to be practical and relatable to the people you're going to be working with. All right, I can take one more question. I'm scrolling for a question that I haven't answered yet. Because I'm seeing a lot of the sort of similar questions coming in based on what I've answered already. And I just want to take one last question that I haven't covered yet, because I know I can't get to everything, unfortunately, guys. All right, let's take this last question. Mr. Quick says, what about playing things in all 12 keys? So it's a question about, is it better to take a song, learn it in all 12 keys? I'm not particularly a fan of that method. So if you're learning like Twinkle Twinkle Little Stars, you're going to learn Twinkle Twinkle in all 12 keys. Simplified example. I don't recommend people do that because there's so many other songs out there. I recommend, if you want to learn all 12 keys, take 12 different songs, learn one for each key. And the reason why you do it that way, it's sort of a compound thing. These 12 songs are going to have 12 different chord progressions, 12 different melodic movements, and just different things that you have to encounter. And so by learning 12 songs in all 12 keys, you're learning 12 songs. So that's 12 new songs added to your repertoire. You're learning probably 12 different combinations of chord progressions, right? And 12 different melodic content and contour, probably also 12 different speed, if not also time signatures. So you get to sort of dive into a whole much more than just taking one same song and beating it out across 12 keys. You know, it's a less effective method because you're literally learning the same 12 progressions in the same key. It's better to learn 12 different songs in 12 keys. Now, if you have a particular chord progression that you like and you want to learn it in all 12 keys, you can do that, right? Like, for example, I think everybody should know how to play a 1-4-5, 1-6-2-5, 3-6-2-5-1 in all 12 keys off the bat of your head. So those are sort of standardized common progressions that you want to learn how to play. And even if you play the same voicing in all 12 keys, that's fine. But that's sort of at the base level. You want to learn those things. But then when it comes to a full song, it's better to just learn one song per key. Now, if for playing purposes, you got to transpose a song, then that's a different case, right? But I don't just recommend you take every song and try to learn all 12 songs in 12 keys. It's a slow process that doesn't bring much. It's better to just learn different song for a new key. All right, guys, well, that's all I can do for today with you guys. This was, as always, a phenomenal question and answer sessions. I'll try to do more of these more frequently because I see that you guys really like them and you bring some really cool questions. But before I go, just so you know, for those of you who really want to take your piano playing to the next level, I would highly recommend you check out pianolessonwithwarren.com. And I said really want to take their playing to the next level because it's a structured, aggressive program. I'm here to help you make progress. And if you really want to make progress, I can help you. But it's going to require sacrificing on your part, time sacrifice. So if you're not willing to find 4 hours a week to practice, Piano Lesson for Warren is not going to be for you because I require people put in the work. And if you want to make progress, you got to put in the work. And if you have that time and you're willing to make that progress, if you're tired of just flip-flopping for years, trust me, pianolessonwithwarren.com can transform your playing. But you got to be ready to put in the work, right? Head over there, check it out. We got a $1 trial. So if you wanted to see what the program's like, you can do that. Secondly, if you want to get into ear training, if you've never done ear training, you don't know where to start, download my ear training app. Active Ear, ACTIVE EAR It's in the App Store. It's for mobile devices. So if you have an iPad or a smartphone or a tablet or something like that, you can download it. You can't download it for a desktop or a laptop. We don't have that version yet. So download that and get into it. Your training got to be a deliberate effort. It's not something you just wake up and then you can start hearing chords and intervals and all of that. It's got to be a method that we approach diligently and strategically and intelligently. Music is intelligent, and so we can't just hope to just learn things through osmosis or proximity to being around other musicians. You know, we got to make time for this thing, just like anything else in life. But the good thing is the time that you're going to make and the time you're going to invest, it's going to pay off. Because once you learn this thing, it doesn't go away. A lot of the things that you guys see me play and a lot of the things that I do, I've been playing and doing this for 10 years. You don't forget it. You know, it's like speaking. Once you learn how to speak and you learn some words and you get a vocabulary, you don't forget how to form a sentence. No, you just don't. And it's the same thing with music. Once you get to a level where you can play all 12 keys, you don't ever have to then keep going through that regimen. You just learn it and you know it and you don't forget it. Ear training, I don't remember the last time I practiced ear training. I haven't practiced ear training in years. And that's because I've gotten to a point where it's just, you don't fall below that level. I could just hear chords now. And if I don't touch a piano for the next 10 years, I will still be able to hear these chords. I'm absolutely certain of that. All right? So that's all I have for you guys today. Have a wonderful week, and we'll talk soon. All right? Bye for now.